The room is stable and we're ready to begin.
Very good. All right. Well, I'll call this meeting to order of the Oceanside Unified School District Board meeting for October 13th, 2020. Start with a roll call. Item 5U, Mr. Maddison.
All right, thanks. So Todd Maddison, parent of Oceanside kids, and as disclosure, a candidate for school board in this election. A simple question on this one. I see we had a number of bids here, some of which were almost $2,000 less than the chosen bid. Those low bids were all disqualified for a clerical error, according to the notes. There's probably more to this, but that makes it sound like someone simply missed a blank on a form and now we're going to spend $200,000 more for this project. I know you can't spend bond money on supplies, but just to give everyone some reference here, that money is enough to provide our teachers with $250 each for classroom supplies. I'm sure our teachers understand what they could buy for that, and all would prefer that to not having to paying out of pocket or asking parents to donate. I assume the issue is more than just missing a checkbox somewhere, but I'd like to ask, what kind of clerical error disqualified those bids, and why would we not allow that to be corrected so we can consider saving $200,000 to use on other things? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Maddison. Staff have an explanation?
Yes, Dr. Soto is going to explain how the bid process works and the legalities that we're required to be involved in. Dr. Soto?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Vitale. Thank you, trustees. Procurement for governmental work is a very specific and legal process. And so when we engage in entertaining and advertising for bids, it has a very specific compliance in order for us to award a bid. And it typically, if a bid is considered unresponsive, it indicates that a required element was not submitted. And the required element is typically considered clerical in the term. However, we are not allowed to consider non-responsive bids. If we were to consider allowing a vendor to correct the error, resubmit, we would be guilty or liable then for any and all future repercussions from the other vendors that were responsive. And so when we engage in the process, we advertise for the scope, and then we are very specific about the criteria for award. And we are very methodical and have multiple raters that grade and acknowledge the responsive contracts before we bring them to the board for award and for consideration. So it is a very strong governmental process that is something that we adhere to, and we take our bidding process very serious, and we acknowledge that if a vendor is non-responsive, that they are given the opportunity to understand why, to correct it in the future.
I would also chime in there and assume that on some of these errors that are submitted, that they in fact are potentially errors of magnitude in terms of dollars on the bids, and that therefore their non-responsiveness could very well be something that could lead to the bid being higher than even $200,000 off in the bids that were submitted. Is that the case that you find it on occasion?
Absolutely, trustee. And another area that we find being non-responsive is if we're requiring a specific certification or a specific licensing, and that is missing or not at the level that we have addressed, then that could be problematic if we were to award it to a firm that brings in a smaller amount but doesn't actually have the qualifications. So it could come back to be a liability for us if we did not adhere to the stated requirements that was posted.
Great, thank you. Please.
Todd Maddison.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Todd Maddison again, parent of OUSD kids, still a candidate for school board. I'm glad we've come to an agreement with the CSA to keep our employees safe. We Todds have to stick together. I think this looks like a good agreement that helps everyone. I agree with them. I'm glad to see item 1A says we'll be adhering to the guidelines issued by the Department of Public Health. Those guidelines appear to have proven effective at protecting kids and staff from COVID. Last week, the Health and Human Services Secretary said we have not seen a connection between increased transmission and school reopening or in-person learning. He also said we're looking at the information to see if there's a connection and so far have not found one. This is the best current information. We now have MOUs for both labor groups. Perhaps the board can ask the district why we haven't seen a plan for safe full-time return yet. I also like item 3, screening. This also follows CDPH guidelines. It's very similar to the outline of screening procedures published by Del Mar Union, a district that has now been back to school full-time for over 4 weeks. The precautions being taken by Del Mar have been so successful, they've had 0 cases among staff, and today show 1 active case among students. I commend the CSEA and district for including such provisions in the document. With those precautions, the Del Mar schools case rate is about 18 times lower than the case rate in the zip codes surrounding their schools. It seems the best way to protect Del Mar Union staff and kids is to put them in school, where the protection measures are more stringent than the precautions outside schools. Since Del Mar Elementaries are exactly the same size as Oceanside Elementaries, perhaps we should do the same for our staff and kids to protect them from COVID the same way they're doing it in Del Mar. Lastly, I appreciate the accommodation provisions of item 6A. Speaking as a cancer survivor myself, I understand the picture is different for high-risk individuals, and I like seeing OUSD accommodate that. That's exactly what the parent group advocating for a plan for safe return has been suggesting since June for all OUSD staff. While I've been knocking on doors, I've spoken to a number of CSEA members. All express the same sentiments we hear from our teachers as well. They want their kids to be back in school. They want to be back in school with them. Last week, CBS 8 held a panel discussion, including experts from Rady's Children's, the county school superintendent, the San Diego district attorney, and others. Rady said, well, we're worried. It's not a big enough worry to keep kids from going to school. And the county superintendent said, there has not been a spread inside a school, an outbreak in a school, or community transmission in a school. Anyone can watch that discussion online if you want to see what the best current information is. Now that we have the proper MOUs in place for both groups, perhaps it's time for the district to present a plan for full-time return to our board for examination and discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Maddison. We need a motion on this to approve the ratification of the MOU. Do I have a motion from anybody?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second the motion. But I
Thank you.
do have a comment
Yes,
regarding
Eleanor.
what I just heard. I think, you're comparing apples and avocados. All right. Del Mar has the average income in Del Mar is $190,000 versus Oceanside, which the average income is $60,000 or a little bit less than that. You have a situation where you have the educational awareness level of parents is a little bit more sophisticated than what we have in Oceanside. And I'll just be frank and honest about it. I've taught in Del Mar, so I know. The fact that I just read 2 weeks ago, I think San Diego Union Tribune, where they said countywide there are 300 students, scholars that have COVID, have been tested positive for COVID. So I'm really concerned that the information that's being presented at the board meetings are not as consistent and perhaps the word honest as they could be. We're not here to campaign. We're here to seek information and to share information. That's the purpose of the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Todd?
All right, thanks.
Go. You're on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Greg. Okay, I'm still a parent. I'm still a candidate. I'm still Todd Maddison. Regarding Eleanor's early comments, I had to put this in. I don't believe COVID infections have anything to do with the income of the population. Del Mar is receiving the same COVID mitigation funding per student we are, and I suggest she simply look at Del Mar's own COVID dashboard if she wants numbers. To suggest that I, of all people, make up numbers as a part of a campaign is ridiculous. I find it offensive. Meanwhile, in the past, when I was a co-leader of the Parent Advisory Committee and a member of the LCAP committee, we put great effort into finding out what parents thought about the education of their kids. Now, as a candidate, I've been walking neighborhoods and I've stood on 2,785 doorsteps. I know many of the people I've talked to are listening, and I have to say thanks for all the great conversations we've had. I haven't met anyone who says they've met Dr. Evans or Mr. Blessing on their door, by the way. I've spoken to single mothers who feel guilty about leaving their elementary kids at home all day to navigate the computer maze on their own, and they hope to get an education. I've spoken to Hispanic families who don't speak enough English to help their little kids in their online classes, and as Eric mentioned, have to depend on secondary school siblings to help out, sacrificing their own school time. I've spoken to parents of kids with special needs who feel they can't provide the kind of specialized instruction their kids need and are worried about the long-term impact. I've spoken to parents who have decided the best thing to do is to create a neighborhood pod or take their kids to a local charter. I've even spoken to parents who have the flexibility to literally leave the state to move their kids to a place where in-person learning is happening. The education of our kids is that important to our parents. Enrollment is now down 7%. If that holds, revenue will be down $17 million next year, which will start a cycle of employee layoffs and more cuts to programs and services for our kids. Does it surprise anyone that customers leave if you don't provide what they want? Maybe we need to do something different here. Maybe we need to elect board members who understand that the customer comes first and understand you can't continually make decisions that benefit the employees over and above the customers without there being an impact. Maybe we need board members willing to stand up for what our parents want for the education of their kids. I would urge anyone listening to this to help in that effort by voting for me, Todd Maddison, in this election. If you have your ballot, mark it tonight. If you'd like to do your part to make parent voices heard, spread the word to your friends and neighbors. You can go to my website, toddforkids.com, Todd4kids.com, sign up for the email list and volunteer there. Let's put kids first in Oceanside education. Vote Todd Maddison for school board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Maddison. Next up,